quite here yet, but she said go ahead and get started. And so that's what we're going to do. Whoop, there we go. That brought her in. We just had, we started talking.
All right, Sade, it looks like you're up first. Give us an overview, please.
Norma is going to give you an overview, and she should be on in 1 second.
And while we're waiting for Norma, just so we can manage time here, we're going to have about just less than an hour. I didn't know. Hopefully, the overview is great in length. I just didn't know what DCF had. They're probably just going to be answering questions. So we'll just begin with Norma and see where we go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, you should have in front of you a couple pieces of testimony. The first is the Child Support Enforcement PowerPoint. That'll be the base of my presentation. And then a packet on bright orange, which is my primer on child support enforcement, and that goes into greater detail and includes an overview of the Midwest Evaluation Report on child support enforcement that was published during the interim. So with the PowerPoint, starting on slide 1, it's just child support enforcement, and then it goes to federal law. So the most recent federal large piece of legislation that touches on child support enforcement was the Personal Work Responsibility and Opportunity Act of 1996. That established a national system of tracking, mandated things like adoption of the Uniform Interstate Family Support Act, allowed enforcement agencies to access public and private records, and required states adopt certain procedures for establishing paternity and child support orders. And I'll note on this slide as well, so you see 4D and non-4D cases. So those are your main two categories of child support enforcement cases. 4D cases are named because they're typically those cases in which a child or family is receiving state or federal assistance, such as TANF cash assistance. So that's under 4D. Other cases handled by the 4D agency upon request of one or both of the parties may also be included in that 4D cases. And then non-4D cases are just those cases that are not handled by the 4D agency. So for state agencies, federal law does require, and that's slide 3, require that states have a single agency that establishes and enforces child support orders for 4D cases. Again, those are those ones that were traditionally from state or federal assistance. Most states have a single child support agency, and in Kansas, that's DCF. And there is also pass-through that kind of deals with that federal-state dual system. So pass-through is when families receiving benefits from TANF and Medicaid are required to cooperate with the state for child support, and they sign over rights to child support. And in some states, there are pass-through payments for TANF assistance, and those range from $50 to the entirety of the TANF cash assistance. Kansas, along with 24 other states, does not do a pass-through system, and so they disregard any of the TANF benefits received. And so it's essentially those TANF assistance would either go through to the state or in a non-pass-through to the family, or in a non-pass-through it wouldn't. Continuing with state agencies, so child support guidelines are established by state agencies. There are some federal requirements for what they include. They have to include health coverage, so that's health insurance coverage. And then there are 3 main models. The first is the income shares model, and that's kind of a proportional amount of the income. The second is the percentage income model, and that's a set percentage, sometimes varying by income level. And the third is the Melson formula model, which is the needs of the parents, the needs of the child, and the standard of living are all considered. The most popular is the income shares model, and that's what Kansas uses. The Melson formula is primarily in, I believe, Delaware, which is where it originated.
Norma, can you speak from the slide that you're talking from?
Oh, sure. I'm on slide 4.
Yeah, since I think we're on WebEx, so just make sure everybody else can see. Thank you.
And then in addition to child support guidelines being established by the state, establishment and enforcement means are also mostly located at the state level. Establishment and enforcement is kind of located on a scale. So some states are more judicial. Examples of a more judicial state would include things like all hearings take place in a courtroom with a judge and with attorneys on both sides representing both parties, to a more administrative state. And an example of that would be where it's all done through the state agency. There's not really a hearing, or if there is a hearing, it's with just the state agency, so some sort of administrative person. And there's no real attorney involvement. There's no lawyers arguing for both sides. Most states fall in a spectrum, and a lot of states there might be 2 different methods. So it may be judicial if it is involved in a divorce, and so there's also spousal support. And it might be administrative if it's just dealing with establishment of paternity and then child support from the get-go. It kind of just depends on the state and the setup. Kansas does tend to lean more judicial in its establishment and enforcement means, just by statute. And then there are a number of methods for enforcing child support. Obviously, a lot of them are, again, at that state level. So there's income withholding. You can withhold tax refunds. You can hold someone who fails to pay in contempt of court. And of course, you can also, there's this at the federal level. So you can ask the federal government to withhold a federal tax refund as well. The federal government can withhold passports. Just a few other things that are really impossible for a state to do on its own, which the federal government can enforce easier. And then there is the funding. So the federal government, and I'm on slide 5 here, the federal government does reimburse 2/3 of state administrative costs, so it's about 66%. States can also receive federal incentive funds. Those are provided for meeting performance measures. Your main performance measures for which a state receives incentive funds include establishment of paternity, percentage of cases with support orders, collection of orders, collection of arrears, and the cost effectiveness. And so the federal match and incentive dollars have to be invested back into the state child support programs. And there are also penalties for failing to hit certain performance target measures. Continuing on to slide 6, how a incentive payment pool percentage for the state is determined is kind of multifaceted. So first, to determine the state's maximum base incentive amount, use the performance measure data. Depending on where a state falls for each of those performance measures, a state may hit their applicable percentage based on a certain level. So there are multiple levels for each performance measure. So for example, if a state has a paternity establishment of 93%, they fall on the applicable percentage level, that is 100%. And so they would then multiply that applicable percentage, in this case, in the example, 100%, by the state's collection base and add them all together. So they do that for each of those 5 performance measures. So if a state's collection base is 50 million, they would get 50 million for their state paternity establishment of 93%, since it's a 100% applicable percentage. So they would do that for each of those 5 performance measures, and that would give them their maximum base incentive amount. They would then divide that maximum base incentive amount by the total maximum base incentive amount for all 50 states. And that is then their percentage of what they would receive from the incentive payment pool for that fiscal year. So it's kind of a multi-layered, multiple-step process, but the key is if you hit certain performance measures, you're going to get more of your base amount, which gives you a higher incentive base amount, and therefore a higher percentage of the incentive payment pool per fiscal year. In Kansas, there are a few key actors. So you have the Department for Children and Families, which is the 4D agency. However, Kansas is also a privatized child support enforcement state, and so it has several contractors. The first grouping here are your full service contractors. So they are the ones who are doing the DCF policy and procedures. They're obtaining the new paternity and child support orders on behalf of DCF. They're monitoring compliance, taking enforcement action. They're really more of that one-on-one with the payors and payees, as it were. And so there are 4 contractors in the state of Kansas. You have Sunflower, Child Support Services, Young Williams, the 18th Judicial District Court Trustee, and the Kansas Child Support Services. Additionally, Kansas contracts out its Child Support Call Center. And that contract is currently held by Maximus. And they answer questions from 40 parties, both on just like general information as well as case-specific questions. They can also mail documents if requested, and they kind of provide any protocol information for 40 cases. Finally, you have the Kansas Payment Center. That's contracted through Young Williams, which is one of the full-service contractors as well. And they receive and disperse all child support payments in Kansas. And I will note, a district court trustee is someone who's appointed by a judge in some counties for the enforcement and collection of child support orders. Kansas is both unique in that it has such a privatized system and that it has some level of local control in that in some districts, it is district court trustees who are that main child support enforcement actor. Moving to slide 8, you can see some data report information. So the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement releases a preliminary data report each fiscal year. So this is for federal fiscal year 2019. Kansas had, and these are some of those same performance measures that would lead to higher incentive payments. So Kansas has a paternity establishment percentage of 102.8%. It has 89.4% of cases with support orders. Child support collections of about 58%. Collection of arrears are about 58.4%. And I believe the cost effectiveness for Kansas in the same fiscal year was about $5.80 to 1. And then some information from DCF for the state fiscal year 2020. There was approximately $437.1 million in child support distributed by the Kansas Payment Center. And there are about 186,000 active children. And that is the end of my PowerPoint. I can see.
Norma, I have a quick question. The IVD, this is not familiar area. What does that mean? Is that a certain area that it's in?
Sure. So that is those 40 cases. So that is 40 cases are those cases traditionally where the child or the family would have been receiving either state or federal assistance. So for example, TANF cash assistance. And so there are a number of federal programs, namely TANF cash assistance and Medicaid, in which a child and their family must cooperate with the 40 agency, which in this case would be DCF in the state of Kansas, for child support orders. 40 cases, however, have been expanded to also just include any of those cases which are handled by the 40 agency, even if they are not required to be handled by the 40 agency. But so some of the information broken down at the federal government level is broken down by both 40 and non-40, since the federal government's primary concern started with those 40 cases.
Thank you. Sarah Petty?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just follow up on it. So did it get that 4D designation from under the Personal Work Responsibility and Opportunity Act of 1996? Did that where it came up with that designation, or is it broader than that?
I believe it predated that. So child support enforcement, when it first was being regulated by the federal government, the main focus was those children who are receiving aid to families with dependent children. So that's the AFDC program that predated TANF cash assistance. So at that time, the sole purpose really was to ensure that children who were receiving federal or state assistance were being taken care of. And so that was kind of the start of the federal legislation. And so since then, it's been expanded over a number of decades. But so those 4D cases, which are named for, so the 4D of the Social Security Act, which governs child support services, did that name started with the Personal Responsibility Act, but the genre of cases predates that act, but that is where, yes, that title came from.
And Norma, you were referring to 5 areas and for which impact on the funding. And I was seeing 4: establishment of paternity, cases with orders, collection of orders and arrears, and cost effectiveness. Is that, or, but I only see 4. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, so it is those 4. The federal government breaks out collection of orders and collection of arrears into 2 separate performance measures.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Norma. Did you have anything else, or are we ready to move on to Sade?
That's everything I had, Madam Chair. And then I'll just note that the primer provides further detail on both the federal legislation leading to where we are now, as well as greater detail on kind of those things I touched on. So child support enforcement methods, child support enforcement means, the privatization of Kansas child support services, as well as kind of where we fall in the spectrum compared to some of our neighbor states, both in privatization and then child support enforcement methods and means.
Okay, thank you. Sade, did you have anything?
Madam, no, I don't have anything. I would move on to DCF, I think is what you have on your agenda.
Yes. So we have Elizabeth Kahn. Wait, oh, you're here.
Oh, no, it's not. All right. Right. I'll take this off. So at DCF, we administer the Kansas 4D program under the authority of the Title 4D of the Social Security Act. DCF also oversees the operation of the Kansas Payment Center. Cases that are not assigned to the state through the 4D program are identified as non-4D once an order is in place. The Kansas 4D program began in Kansas in 1976, and our authority is set out in KSA 39-753. Every state and territory, as well as some tribes, have 4D programs which are overseen by the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement. OCSC is our federal partner, and they are housed within the Department of Health and Human Services. OCSC sets procedures to review programs, approve state plans, audit the programs, as well as providing training and technical assistance. They also gather a variety of data from the submission of required reporting by the 4D programs. OCSC provided this infographic for Kansas to show that in federal fiscal year 2019, the child support program was only behind Medicaid in the number of children served, with 140,000 in Kansas, with 14.3 million children served nationwide. For every dollar spent on the program, $5.80 was collected by our Kansas program. Funding for the 4D program is shared by state and federal governments, with the state paying 34% of administrative costs and the federal government paying 66%. However, each state has a maintenance of effort, which sets forth the minimum each state will spend on the program. In addition, incentive funds are available based upon performance, but any earned funds must be spent on the program. There are also financial penalties if minimum thresholds are not met. Yeah.
Are you going off your executive summary, or?
No, we submitted a PowerPoint.
Right, okay. So, okay. What page are you on?
I think I'm on page, hang on a second, let me pull it up. I think I'm on PowerPoint, well, the infographic is slide 3, and then funding is slide 4. So I'm getting ready to start slide 5. Okay. The Kansas 4D program is within the Department of Children and Families. We are a state-administered program and have a small state staff within DCF. The state office is responsible for all policy and procedure as well as oversight of the overall program. Our 6 contractors provide the day-to-day operations of the program as set forth in their contracts. 1 contract is for the Kansas Payment Center, 1 is for the statewide call center, and 4 full-service contractors provide the day-to-day operations. The Kansas Child Support Services, or 4D program, is open to anyone who enrolls for our services or is required to participate due to other benefit programs, child care, TANF, Medicaid, food assistance, and foster care. The 4D program will establish parentage and/or support order for a child or enforce an existing order. We work with other 4D programs, state, territory, or tribal, as well as other countries, to assist families in order establishment and the collection of child support. Our program uses the Kansas Child Support Guidelines to recommend a realistic amount of child support based upon verified income information for the legal parents at court hearings. The program has dedicated attorneys who represent the Secretary of DCF as their client. Once a support order is set by the court, our program works to find financial resources, usually through an employer, and collect the court-ordered support. We do face limitations as some parents are not findable or do not have a source of income or other financial resources that can be attached. Our program cannot guarantee the collection of court-ordered child support. In state fiscal year 2020, we had 129,489 cases open, serving 185,907 children in multiple programs, and established 4,870 new child support orders and established 1,310 legal parentage orders. Our call center representatives helped at least 272,090 live calls, of which almost 2% were employer-related, 57% were payee custodial parent-related, 36% were pay or non-custodial parent-related, and 5% were other. Okay. Kansas Child Support is a unique service. In Kansas, a party usually meets the system for the first time when an order of the court instructs them to pay support, pay it to the Kansas Payment Center, and requires collection to be done by income withholding when possible. At that point in time, depending on a party's location in Kansas, they may receive government assistance through either the 4D agency, DCF, or a court trustee. Kansas established an option for judicial districts to choose to establish a court trustee office which provides enforcement services after an order of support is in place, and that's at KSA 20-377. Currently, there are 17 court trustees. Unfortunately, this means that not every judicial district has a court trustee in place. If the party chooses not to use government services, they proceed privately, either seeking the assistance of an attorney or representing themselves. Those cases that are assisted by DCF are 4D, or non-4D, which is both the court trustee and privately represented cases. If a court determines that a case is not to be paid through the Kansas Payment Center, the parties are responsible for their own accounting and follow the directives that are given by the court. Yeah, we're on page, I think it's, the map is on 11, so yeah, I'm getting ready for page 12. Each state is required to have a centralized state collection and disbursement unit, and the authority for ours is set out in Chapter 39 of the Kansas statutes. Both DCF and the Office of Judicial Administration have specific duties regarding the Kansas Payment Center. All cases that are required to be paid through the Kansas Payment Center complete paperwork that tells the KPC how to process any payment that is received. The KPC staff use that paperwork to set up the case on their system, receipt in and record received payments, receipts, and disperse payments to families, disbursements. In state fiscal year 2020, 2.1 million payments totaling $408.9 million were receipted at the KPC. Almost 2 million disbursements totaling $437 million were sent out to Kansas families, with 51% of the disbursements for 4D families. Each state child support program operates differently within the federal parameters. In 1996, changes occurred to the program with the implementation of the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996, which implemented temporary assistance for needy families and updated the requirements for TANF recipients to participate with the 4D program to receive benefits and required states to have a centralized state disbursement unit. Child support was identified as a long-term solution for children to receive financial stability.
So this question actually came up to me a little bit earlier. So in Kansas, in a divorce proceedings, they might be under collection or they might not. Is that?
Well, as under a divorce, if the parties have opted to pay privately, they could do that, not pay through the Kansas Payment Center. The judge has to approve that. They could be in a county that has a court trustee, like if they're in Johnson County, they could choose to go through the Johnson County Court Trustee, or they could enroll for 4D services simply by completing our enrollment application, and they would then be a 4D case.
So is it more likely that in the 17 counties where there's court trustees that they would be going through through the court trustees?
And we don't really have any statistics on that, but I mean, from my observation is they tend to start out at the court trustee's office because each court trustee usually, well, they have certain rules about whether or not they take cases or not. And then if they want like certain services, then they flip over to 4D. Like we can do federal debt set off. And so if they want those types of services, they come to our office. But if they're and they may just stay with the court trustees.
So, so the court trustees can't do the federal set-off?
That is correct, and they can't do passports either. We have certain things that we can do as a 4D agency, and I believe, OJA may correct me, but I think that that's correct.
So in some cases, they might start off with their court trustees and then transfer over to 4D because of the services that they want to receive.
Right. We have certain services that the court trustees do not.
Okay.
Sedgwick County is pink on the map because they are that contractor is only in the 18th. So on the next map, you'll see our four contractors in the areas that they serve. So the 18th and the 29th are JD's judicial districts that have a contractor, one contractor. Okay, so beginning in 1997, the Kansas 4D program began privatization. The first contracts were for legal enforcement. Essentially, it appears the 4D program contracted the enforcement of contracts that were similar in function to the court trustees. A state staff was maintained for caseload management, including financials and the establishing of new legal orders. Legal enforcement contracts began in 1997 with 21 judicial districts. In 2000, operations of the federally mandated state disbursement unit, the Kansas Payment Center, was competitively bid. 2007, the CSS customer call center was opened with a vendor. In 2008 and 2010, enforcement contracts were again bid and resulted in expansion of legal enforcement contracts. The state workforce remained responsible for establishment and caseload management. In 2013, the daily operations were competitively bid and 4 full-service vendors were contracted. This shift created full privatization of the Kansas 4D program in September of 2013. And if you look at the slide, I think it's slide 18 has our current map with the 4 contractors. In 1998, Congress enacted the Child Support Performance and Incentive Act. A key provision was the requirement that states meet performance standards to receive incentive funds. On the slides, you will see performance from federal fiscal year 2003, which we selected as a baseline year as the first reporting was in 2001. Federal fiscal year 2012 is the year before full service privatization. Federal fiscal year 2014 is the first fiscal year after privatization contracts. Federal fiscal year 2017 is halfway through the contracts. Federal fiscal year 2019 is the most recent federal year available for comparison on federal performance. And federal fiscal year 2020 is what Kansas reported in our annual report to OCSE in October 2020. Given the time limitations, I'm going to flip through these.
Start to
Sure.
So I'm looking at, on slide 19, I'm looking at these performance measures, but I'm not certain what, like the 85.3%, what that refers back to. Is that?
If you look at the slide, the calculation is on the left, and that's the math. So are you on slide?
I'm on 19.
19. So the calculation for paternity, we do statewide paternity, is a number of minor children in the state born out of wedlock with paternity established or acknowledged during the fiscal year, divided by the number of children in the state born out of wedlock during the preceding fiscal year.
Okay, so that one is on paternity. Okay. And then the next one is on support.
Yeah, the measurements at the top. And so if it's all right, I'll just skip through those. So
Maybe you could focus on 21, the current collection. I mean, are we going to see information about why we're still only in 2003, it says 55.3% on collections, and now in 2020, it's 57.9. I mean, there's hardly any change there.
Right. So current collections, this compares the amount of current support collected versus the total amount of current support owed in the 4D caseload. Kansas shows improvement from 2003, but this indicator is very much driven by the Kansas economy. And we acknowledge we dipped a bit in 2020, and we are monitoring to see if the trend continues or if we can hold steady. So, I'm sorry?
No, I mean, that I don't know that would say that this is a great progress. We're going from 55 to 57.
Right. I think if you, right,
58.
if you flip to slide number 24 and 25, those are all we have. It's a line chart and the actual numbers from 2001. So you can see each year as we've progressed.
Current support has not progressed.
Right, we started at 54.7% and we're at 57.9% in 20 years.
Are we going to see how that compares to other states? Because
I do not have, I did not bring anything regarding other states. So, so jumping to slide, I think it was, slide 26. The heart of our program is the dedicated staff who ensure the daily operations. The snapshot of the 4D program occurs each September 30th and captures the number of staff in the program on the day as well as the number of open cases. At the end of September 2020, we had 390 full-time equivalent staff and 126,571 open cases. In 2019, the 4D program identified that it needed to review its many facets and determine where to use its resources. As part of that review, in fall 2019, a third-party evaluator was hired to complete a review of the program. Midwest Evaluation and Research, LLC, was the selected evaluator and were requested to complete an evaluation of the 4D program, in particularly the impact of privatization on the program, short and long term, as well as the efficiency, customer service, and general managerial effectiveness of the 4D offices. In June 2020, CSS received the final report. The top 3 recommendations made to us were the following. 1, maximize the potential of privatization contracts. 2, update the statewide computer system, cases. And 3, modernize the Kansas 4D program. Midwest suggested that Kansas do the following to maximize contracts. Identify what type of contractors model works best in that there is a traditional caseworker model, a task-oriented model similar to how DCF ES works, and a hybrid. Another suggestion was to increase the quality of service in the multi-agent environment through working to simplify the complex system that is seen as working against parents and for the system to communicate better both through more access points and a different approach through communication at both manager and service delivery. The statewide computer system is a central feature in the Child Support Worker Day. It is the repository for all of our essential information, is literally the backbone of the program. Midwest strongly recommended that be addressed with an appropriate technological solution. Third, Midwest recommended CSS focus on identifying and removing barriers to internal and external customers. CSS needs to share more information with the public, current customers, potential customers, and other stakeholders such as employers, taxpayers, and the legislature. Kansas CSS needs to review other high-performing 4D programs and determine if the changes that worked for other states will work for us, and then take the necessary steps to make the change. As a result of the report, several actions have been taken. First, in July 2020, a request for proposal for replatforming our statewide computer system was released. We are currently in the procurement phase of that process. Second, we are following the example of other 4D programs who have successfully moved their performance by focusing on the data within their control. Our first phase to modernize the 4D program is through a review of our policy and procedure with an emphasis on data integrity. We're building capacity and updating our operations to ensure standardized and similar experiences received statewide. Next, we'll begin analyzing our data to ensure we are making data-driven decisions both regarding policy and procedure, both by looking at what is happening in Kansas as well as other states. At the same time, we are working to enhance both the internal and external customer experience. At the forefront is building a communication strategy both internally as well as externally to ensure we are an accessible professional program. Third, we work regularly with our contractors regarding the daily operations. However, we made the decision to issue an RFP regarding full service operations and call center functions. That RFP closed March 11th of 2021. The 2021 RFP embraced many of the recommendations from the Midwest evaluation. To begin, CSS states their top 3 priorities for vendors to consider in their responses. 1, timely, correct, and accurate casework. 2, a knowledgeable, fair, and professional workforce. And 3, a unified One Kansas 4D team approach. The RFP states where offices are to be located, what hours need staff to be available, what qualifications are needed for positions, and areas that need specialized contractor processes returned in the proposals. CSS is asking for details to be able to envision how the contractor's daily operations will occur. The RFP also strives to set clear boundaries of responsibilities. It anticipates the elimination of a standalone call center and aligns the responsibility for answering phone calls to the contractor who has the case. In addition, the outcomes focus on operations such as ensuring timely processing of paperwork, having and following escalation processes, and accomplishing the case management tasks that have been identified as mandatory. The responsibilities of CSS administration are also set out. CSS is constantly looking for ways to identify and remove barriers to the program, as the Midwest report highlighted that the 4D program serves 1 in 5 children and more children and their families than any human services program other than Medicaid and SNAP. Thank you for the opportunity to present the DCF Child Support Overview.
We have a copy of the RFP that closed just the other day.
And I should be able to
Find out.
forward that to you. Yes, I'll check with Ms. Edwards because it's no longer on the website.
Okay.
Yeah.
Senator Petty.
Looking at the performance measure summary, as part of this RFP that's gone out, are these performance measures, the summary from the review that was done, are they top priorities in that with the RFP?
What we found out from the past year is it really shows how much our performance is driven by the economy. So our RFP focuses on things that are within the contractor's control, such as working cases timely and doing annual reviews and having an escalation process for customers to work their cases. So we want to start with the core with hopes that the overall federal performance will improve once we have happy Kansas customers.
Can you say that again? Performance is based on
The economy, I mean,
the economy, but then you said something else.
sorry.
When you say that, I mean, I would agree that the economy does have a lot to do with it, but if I look at this performance measures summary, and I look from 2001 to 2020, and we know like 2008, I mean, there've been downturn years, but there's basically no change. And in that, our current support, the case orders have improved. Cases with support orders, that's improved. The paternity thing, that's at 100%. But collections haven't improved, or cases with arrears, they haven't improved. So, I mean, it's hard to see that you could, to use that basis of based on economy when you don't see really any upturn years.
You're right. We don't know. Cases is a mainframe system, and we know that there has to be what we're missing, and we're not sure what it is that we're missing, that something's not working. So that's why we're going back to basics with our contracts to make sure that if they do an annual case review, where can we catch the problem? If we're requiring like an annual case review, that means at least once a year, they should touch a case and see, you know, did they miss an alert? Did they miss something in the case that would have caused, was there an error in cases that an income withholding order a notice didn't automatically generate? And it's that casework element that we're trying to address with our new contracts.
One other question. When I'm looking at this summary, a couple. So are you saying then with this RFP that's out and with the actions taken, so I mean, I notice the purpose, 3 priorities, timely, correct, and accurate casework. So in a knowledgeable, fair, and professional workforce, and a unified one, Kansas 4D team approach. So is there an assumption built in there that that's somehow going to improve collections?
Our team, I mean, we discussed this, because the collections are linked to the economy, we believe that if we focus on daily casework, by touching the cases and working those cases consistently, regularly, that the human error will address the issues. That's what when we look at the complaints that we have, it appears, you know, it's human error, not necessarily system error. So that's all I mean, this program has been in place for 20 years and the needle hasn't moved. You know, when you look at historically, it hasn't moved. So we have to figure out what moves the needle. And that's what we're trying to figure out.
So are you also looking at other states to see what?
We look at other states on a regular basis. Kansas is very unique in that we have this dual system where we have the court trustee and the 4D program. So we don't have all the cases in the 4D system. And so, you know, how much does that play into it? We don't know. There are assumptions that plays into it a lot by having a dual system.
So is that an item that's under consideration, whether that's an effective model?
And I mean, it's on the statutes that there's a court trustee and a 4D program. And that's what we have to work with.
Of course, and we have bills come before us that change statutes all the time.
Right.
And we like to, and not that they're always based on very good evidence, but sometimes they are. And that's why that's why I would think DCF or any other state agency would do a study so that as they look at it, they could say, hey, the system, which has been in place for 20 years, is or is not working, and maybe it needs
We don't have the evidence today to tell you that it's for sure court trustee, that the dual system is the problem. That is what makes Kansas different from other states. We do know that. And so, but at this point in time, we don't have the evidence one way or the other as to that.
And lastly, I'm not sure what the performance measure summary, on that cost effectiveness ratio, I'm not sure, what does the ratio actually mean?
That ratio means that for every dollar that's every dollar that's spent on the program, how many dollars go out in regards to collections. So for every dollar that's been spent in Kansas, I believe it's $5.81 has been collected in child support. So we're a very cost-effective program, is what that's trying to say.
Really? So 2020, the cost effectiveness ratio is 6.54.
Right, so that means $6.54 was collected in child support for every dollar that was spent on the 4D program.
Okay. Thank you for letting me.
So, again, back to the RFP, does it have detailed, measurable goals, more than just communicate better? And, does it get into some more detail about?
We have specifics. We took we did not set any performance measures to say you had to gain 1% or 2% or anything like that. And mainly that was a recommend, as we looked at the Midwest report, they had a comment on that about how is it setting a basement. And what we're trying to do with this RFP is get back to casework and see how much casework adjusts those federal performance measures. Because we have an idea, but we don't know how much of an idea, because the last contracts had that area in them, and it wasn't tracked very effectively.
I think utilities will be here at 1:30, so I want to, I know you had written testimony. Did you want to make any comments?
Dan, did you
have a question, Dan, for Elizabeth? Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't see that. Elizabeth, come on back up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And on this booklet here, the last page, at the bottom down there, it says going over the results. These are two things that impacted the work of the program was the COVID, of course, always does. And then it says there was a lack of usable data available from DCF. What is that they was missing?
Well, I believe Midwest can probably answer that question better, and I believe they're here. They asked for certain things, and because of the age of our system, cases is a mainframe. It's not something that we could readily pull out of our system in the time frame that was needed. It was, if they asked for something, a couple of their queries, we were like, that's a 6-month to 12-month request to build that query into our mainframe system and pull it out.
That much time between 6 to 8 months, possibly?
6 to 12 months. It can take that long based upon what we're looking for.
Okay.
Does Midwest want to respond? It must be on WebEx.
Yes, Mr. Shepard is.
Yeah, hi. This is Matt Shepard with Midwest Evaluation. Yeah, she is right. I'll try to put this quickly into context. So there's a lot of data inside that cases system that would be very helpful in understanding the federal performance measures and how we are, where we're at. So for example, who are the individuals who are not paying on arrears, or who are paying on arrears, and those kinds of things. But we are unable to get, and they are unable to get, the information out of those cases, that cases system, in order to run the kind of analysis that we would need to do what you would call kind of a continuous quality improvement process, to really dig in on how much of the variance in performance measures is related to service versus how much of the variance in performance measurements may be related to the way that we record and report data. I think there's some of that as well. So.
Okay, it seems like you've been doing the same thing for a long, long time, and we're just want to modernize or whatever you want to call it, but there's ought to be a little more nimbleness around as you can respond to situations.
I would agree 100% to that.
And our re-platforming effort, that RFP that we're in the procurement process for that, we're hopeful that when that wraps up, we're going to be able to access the data a lot more efficiently. But that is its own project and its own time frame. So.
Any other questions for Elizabeth? All right, Paul, did you want to make a few brief comments?
Paul Johnson with the Kansas Rural Center. These will be very brief. First of all, I really applaud Laura Howard having contracted with Midwest Evaluation and Research to really dig into this. And I think they've asked some of the very basic questions. And they also said there's a lot more research data they need, and there's many more areas that need to be researched in depth. I'm glad to see Legislative Research put out a primer at this point. And I mean, in essence, this system needs a 101 course. This system needs legislators to take an interim committee and put an interim committee together to really dig into this, because in 2023, you're going to have to make some final decisions about these 10-year contracts that were lent in 2013. And the basics come down to, should Kansas stay with this judicial-only model, or should it head towards an administrative model? You always heard about the computer system. That needs to be upgraded. Can any of the new federal dollars that's going to come through COVID-19 relief package be used to speed up this process at this point? I still don't understand. The Kansas Payment Center handles 95% of all the child support collections in Kansas. Why we can't get out of the Kansas Payment Center what the court trustees, the private cases are getting percentage-wise on collections as we do on the 4D side. I don't understand why that's just an integral part of the Kansas Payment Center contract at this point. And so I would conclude by saying, there's nothing easy about this. This system involves almost 245,000 kids of private and public cases. I mean, it touches close to 1 out of 3 Kansas kids in our state. This income support program, you know, we've been below the national average on collection and arrearages for 20 years. And we need to figure out how to improve it. And we need to look at states like Iowa and a few other states that have really excelled in increasing their collections. And it's tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars a year for Kansas children and families that are really desperately needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Paul? We have just a couple minutes. Anyone else feel the need to comment at this point? I agree with Mr. Johnson. There's a lot to read in this backup material here.
Madam Chair, this is Norma Volkmer.
Okay.
If I may, I'll just note, Senator Petty was asking about data compared to other states. In the back of the primer, the last 5 pages or so, there are a number of tables pulled from that Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement preliminary report that compares Kansas to the 3 states compared in the Midwest Evaluation Research Report, which were Arizona, Nebraska, and Tennessee, as well as Iowa. So the data for Kansas and those 4 states are included from the most recent preliminary data report. So that's going back to 2015 for several tables from that report. So that data is in that primer.
Thank you, Norma. All right. Don't have anyone else wishes to speak, so we are adjourned. Thank you all for your information. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't see. Come up to the mic, identify yourself, please.
I'm Amy Raymond, the Trial Court Programs Director for the Office of Judicial Administration, and you asked that I be here to answer questions about court trustees. So what I will just say, that's okay. I know you're running short on time. What I'll just say is if you have questions about court trustees, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and I would be happy to answer any additional questions you have, but you have a vast amount of information to work through. So I don't want to.
Sorry, I didn't have you on the agenda, so
That's okay.
I would have
That's
had you comment. If you wouldn't mind, just send your contact information and everything to my office, and we'll get it to them. Or you can just
Absolutely.
send it to all of them. There's only 3 of us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, we're